You guys want to finish making this sea lion, and I completely understand. I lost quite a few of you guys after the posting of the first part. I must say this is a far advanced beading, so for those of you guys that who stuck by, good job. So enough with the intro, let's jump right to it. The first thing I'm gonna make is the body. Okay, this is what we left off last week. Take your right wires and thread it through the adjacent bead. We're trying to make the first loop on the 4th row. You should get used to by this technique if you follow along the first 2 videos. Okay, now insert 4th main bead to your left wire. And crisscross it with the opposite wire. Now you just make your first loop. To make the second loop, instead of going over 1 bead, you want to go over 2. Be sure to pull everything really tight. Go ahead, grab your left wire and add on 3 main color beads. Crisscross it with your opposite wire and you just make your second loop. For the third loop, go over 2 beads again and also add on 3 main color beads. Notice that the second and third loop are the repeating steps, so you're going to apply the same technique throughout the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th loop. The 9th loop, which is the closing loop of the 4th row, is a little bit different. Instead of going over 2 beads, you need to go over 3. Once you have all of them threaded, it should look something like this. Now to close it up, you only need to add 2 main color beads. Go ahead, crisscross it with your opposite wire. Now you just complete the 9th loop of the 4th row. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the 5th row. Thread your right wires through 1 adjacent bead. Use your left wire and add on 3 main color beads. Crisscross it using the usual technique and you just make your first loop. Now you need to go over 2 beads for the second loop. It's very important that you use the right amount of beads in every loop, so pay attention. Okay, now you add on 3 main color beads for the second loop. With that, you completed the second loop. Go over 2 beads again. In the 5th row, you're pretty much going over 2 beads in between the first loop and the last loop. But each loop may require a different amount of beads. And for the third loop, add on 2 main color beads. Okay, now go ahead, crisscross it using the opposite wire. You kind of starting to see the sea lions getting a little bit chubby. And this complete the 3rd loop. Thread the wire through 2 more beads. And go ahead, add on 3 main color beads. Crisscross the wire and you just have your 4th loop. Go over 2 more beads. Add on 2 main color beads for the 5th loop. If you make a mistake, don't worry, just undo the wire and try again. In the worst case, you could take the whole thing apart and redo it all over again, which I have done many times. Okay, now add on 3 main color beads for this 6th loop. Okay, now we are getting really close to the 7th loop. That's where you need to pay attention, because we're going to mark the beads that where we're going to attach the tail. Go ahead, use your wire, thread it through the 2 beads as usual. Okay, now you can set the half-finished sea lion down. Use a colored thread and cut it into 3 pieces. Now go ahead, thread it through 3 main color beads. You don't need to know the exact length of the thread as long as it's long enough so that you could use it as a mark. I would recommend tying 2 knots just in case to prevent the thread from falling out. Once you have that ready, grab your sea lion again and insert the first bead that is marked, and the second bead is unmarked bead. That is 2 main color beads for the 7th loop. Make sure you move the string around so you can see the marked bead. Okay, we're moving on to the 8th loop. Now for the 8th loop, you are basically repeating the same step as the 7th loop. Okay, the first bead needs to be marked and the second one is not. Those 2 marks are basically where we're going to attach our tail. For the 9th loop, you need to go over 3 beads instead of 2, because we're closing up the 5th row. And for the 9th loop, add on 2 main color beads. Alright, you just finished the 5th row. The 6th row is the last and also the closing row of the body. For the first loop on the 6th row, you need to go over 2 beads. And add on 3 main color beads. Notice that we are stringing the body and it's starting to form a ball. That is going to be your first loop. Now for the second loop, you need to go over 3 beads instead of 2. See how we are stringing the body down? Okay, now add on 2 main color beads. Once you crisscross the wire, this is going to close up the body even more. This is going to be your second loop. For the 3rd loop, you need to go over 3 more beads again. Add on 2 main color beads. That is going to be your 3rd loop. For the 4th loop, you need to go over 2 beads instead of 3. You are also going to use the last marked bead for the tail. You need to insert the first bead that is not marked and the second bead needs to be marked. And that will do for the 4th loop. The 5th loop, which is the closing loop for the body, it requires you to go over 3 beads. For the last loop, you only need but just 1 main color bead to close everything up. Remember to crisscross that last bead. This is the last loop, but we're not done yet. We need to use the right wire to loop it through the opposite loop of the last loop so that it will meet up with the wire that is closer to the last marked bead. This will also uniform the body all together. With that, every loop on the body has 2 wires running through it. Whew, now you just got done making the body. If you want, you could take a break. If not, then we're gonna move on to the tail. Grab any one of the wire, add on 5 main color beads and 1 tiny bead. Pull the beads close as you can to the body, but use the same wire running through the bead that's closest to the tiny bead. It's the same technique that we used to make the flippers. Now use the same wire, add on 2 main color beads. Find the first 2 marked bead, thread it through both of the beads. Okay, now we have one part of the tail ready. Use the same wire, add on 3 main colored beads and 1 tiny bead. Pull the bead as close as you can to the body and use the same wire, thread it through the bead that's closest to the tiny bead. This is how it should look so far. Grab the same wire, add on 3 main color beads. Okay, now we're gonna close up the tail. This is very important, so find the first bead of the right tail. Thread the bead through like so. You will know you got it right if both of the wires meet up together again. Be sure to pull it really tight. Once you do that, you should see the tail form nicely. And go ahead, tie a few knots using the both wires. And then trim away the wire. Now you can also use a scissor and trim away the marked thread. And voila, it's pretty much finished. The only thing that you need to add on is the whiskers. I got this black beading wire at Walmart. You could pretty much use anything as long as the thread or the object is actually stiff. I only add on 2 whiskers, mainly because the center black bead is really small. Okay, now this little guy is ready to be packaged and give away as a gift. It's so fat and cute. I hope you guys stick with this tutorial all the way to the end. I do know that this could be challenging to some of you guys, but you will never know what you can make unless you try. I'm pretty sure this is gonna keep you guys busy for another week. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. And of course, may you be happy.